Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Karla McLaren, who's here to share with us her new book, The Language of Emotions: What Your Feelings Are Trying to Tell You. While we all have emotions, are we really understanding what our emotions are trying to tell us? Today's discussion is here to unravel just that. So, Karla McLaren is an award-winning author, researcher, workplace consultant, and empathy expert. Her grand unified theory of emotions reevaluates even the most negative emotions and opens new pathways to self-awareness, effective communication, and healthy empathy. Her applied work, Dynamic Emotional Integration, is a groundbreaking process that reveals the genius and healing power within the emotional realm. So welcome to the show, Karla McLaren.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It's good to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. So what inspired you to revise this book? I know this book has been through a revision.
The book was originally published in 2010. And since that time, I have gotten my master's degree and done a lot more research and study. And so the book needed a freshening up. It needed to get into this decade. And I'm so lucky that I was able to revise and update the entire thing. It feels really good to be able to change things based on, learning and growing.
You start off your book with the difficult beginnings of empathy. And while it's a very hard topic to talk about, I think it's something that a lot of people go through. Is there a part of this journey that you would like to share with us?
My family tends to be pretty artistic and empathic and insensitive. But something happened to me when I was little, which was being molested by the man across the street. And I wasn't the only one. It was sort of a normal thing in our neighborhood, if that makes sense. And what I learned from that was to turn up my sensitivity and turn up my empathy so I could keep an eye out, not just for him and whatever his moods were that day, but also I could keep an eye out for the younger children. I was 3 or 4 when this started, and there were younger children as well. So, not knowing how I turned my empathy up, I didn't know how to turn it back down. And so childhood was for me an experience of being sort of bowled over by sensations and colors and sounds and smells and emotions. And so I was dealing with a great deal of hypersensitivity and hyperempathy. It was a good idea at the time. It was a good survival strategy, but it wasn't a very good life strategy.
Did you find that that always had you in that kind of flight or fight kind of area as well?
Not so much there, but hypervigilance, right? I was always very, very aware of my surroundings.
So you talk about emotions. Why do we need to be aware of those or really understand them?
As I came into sort of understanding emotions as a little person, I saw them as mostly trouble, right? They You just needed not to have them because they were sort of in my idea and a lot of people's ideas, emotions are sort of the root of all evil. And so I worked in my life to ignore them, repress them, suppress them, try to outwit them. And that's never going to happen. So I began to just turn toward them in sort of an angry way and say, well, what are you having to say to me right now? What do you want? And what I heard back from the emotions was so amazing that it started me out on a life path of understanding them, that they are really crucial parts of us, but it's very easy to not be able to see that because of the way that many people have learned how to use their emotions, for instance, to attack people with anger or to attack people with envy and greed. But also, it's how we're taught about emotions, that they are not important, that they're less than your intellect, that they're lower than. Than pretty much anything you could say. Emotions are sort of in the trash heap of humanity. And sometimes you can find wonderful things in the trash heap. I found that out.
I can imagine. I can imagine. And so when we talk about emotions, I know there's so many people have different descriptions for those. How do you describe our emotions?
I think they're essential to cognition, they're essential to our capacity to make meaning. The sociologist of emotion, Arlie Hochschild, calls them our most important sense. They are how we understand the world um, socially and emotionally. We understand the world visually through our eyes and auditorially through our ears, but we understand understand the world socially through our emotions. And they are a crucial sense that basically you can't live without them. You can't function as a human being without them.
So as we dive into emotions, do these come from our thoughts or instincts? Where do they come from?
They are neurological. I mean, they come from the body, and they each have a specific purpose in the maintenance of the self and the maintenance of our social beings. And they are thoughts and emotions are part of one process called cognition. So there's not one that comes from the other. I would say that thoughts are a later are a later thing than emotions. Emotions are more ancient. They have a much deeper well of wisdom than thoughts do, but they are both real things. One doesn't cause the other.
Now, are there positive and negative emotions?
Well, if you look at my Facebook page, people are fighting about that right now. I say no. I say no because if emotions are a part of our cognition, which they are, a part of our capacity to make meaning, then there aren't any bum ones. There aren't any ones that you can take away and live a whole and meaningful life. The problem with the idea of negative and positive emotions is that that's how most of us were taught to see them. And if we were taught to see them that way, we will do we will likely do one of two things. We will want to have the allegedly positive ones all the time, even when it's not appropriate for us to have those emotions. We will also want to get away from the allegedly negative emotions, and we won't develop skills with those emotions. The skills we'll develop is running and hiding and suppressing. So, just the idea that emotions are positive and negative set up immediately a kind of emotional incompetence in both directions.
Would you say that our emotions have messages for us?
Yes, they all do. Yes. And keying into those messages can help us become sort of better brain owners, better body owners, better understanders of ourselves and others. And um, it can simply help us mature as human beings.
So, how should we perceive our emotions? Because I know you look at this in such a unique way.
Mhm. For me, I see them as my friends and as parts of what makes me who I am. I also see them as containing a wisdom that sometimes surprises me, and I could never have figured it out in the way that my emotions figured it out. So I see them as like a really deep form of intelligence that, because most of us have been taught about positive and negative emotions, we really don't have clear access to unless we befriend our emotions and begin to listen to them in their own language.
Do people tend to mirror the emotions of others in a given situation or environment?
Yes, as social mammals, we naturally share emotion, or we put on the emotion of others to see what they might be feeling. We can be wrong. We can read people wrong and put on the wrong emotion and sort of be somewhere else in the conversation. But yes, it's normal for humans and other social primates to share emotion.
So, when people say, Oh, you're so emotional. How do you feel about that?
A lot of times I'll say, "Well, which emotion?" Because there's 17 of them. So come on, man, let's talk about this. Um, Generally, what that means, I would say, I mean, you could throw some things in here, but it would mean you're sort of out of control, you're melodramatic, you're kind of not to be trusted. So yeah, with that term, you're so emotional. We're all being taught every day that emotional is not okay. It's not okay to be emotional. And yet, if emotions, which they are a sense and they're a part of the way that you think and how you make meaning, the fact is we're emotional all day long. We're emotional at night when we're asleep, when our dreams are telling us things about, what had gone on in the day, about how we feel. Knowing how we feel, understanding our emotions is crucial if we want to be fully conscious beings.
It seems like, we've been so taught or have really been programmed in ways to, how you're saying, not show emotions.
Mhm.
So when we get to this place where we're trying to show our emotions appropriately, how do we decipher that?
I actually have, lists of what the emotions do, what they mean, how you can engage with them, how you can speak to them in their own language. And a lot of that work is internal. What I say when I go out and teach this work is we're going to speak about emotions tonight, but we're not going to be emotional. And I'm using that word, but basically, it's not going to be a bad acting class, right? We're not going to, I'm angry or I'm so sad. But we're going to talk about these emotions in terms of how they work and what they do. For instance, with anger, anger's job is to help us set boundaries. That's its job, to help us set boundaries around what we value. And if someone steps across a boundary of ours or steps into an unhealthy relationship with something we value, then our anger should come up in some way. Now, how we set boundaries is up to us. That's our skill set. And as we've all seen, many people set boundaries with violence. That's not really a good skill set in most instances, unless violence is necessary, right? But for most people, anger is either you repress it and fall apart, or you express it wildly and you hurt other people. So, in that behavior that we've learned around anger, we have told other people that anger is a allegedly negative emotion. But what we don't see is that anger is about setting boundaries, and we have options about how we set boundaries. It's to know what the emotion does, then we have choices. If we don't know what the emotion does, then we're just sort of a pinball careening around this world.
So many people just have never really identified their emotions or what they're feeling or even had
Mhm.
awareness of it.
Yeah, yeah. And that makes it really difficult because there's been a lot of research done, especially by Lisa Feldman Barrett and her colleagues, on the importance of emotional vocabulary. And what's being shown is that the larger and more articulate your emotional vocabulary is, the better you can regulate your emotions. I mean, that's it. Have more words, and suddenly you're more skilled. So that's probably one of the easiest fixes that that's possible, is to get a larger or develop a larger emotional vocabulary that will help you begin to identify your emotions and begin to work with them, and know which one it is. For some people, you ask them how they feel and they say bad. I was like, well, that's not even an emotion word. There's no emotion called bad. And I have an emotional vocabulary list that's free on my website. It's also in the new language of emotions. And it gives you words for soft and medium and intense presentations of each emotion in each category, so that you can really dial in and see, you know, people say, I'm just mad. Well, that's one word, but are you crabby? Are you critical? Or are you exasperated? Or are you livid? Where are you in this world of anger? Where are you in this? And that can help people begin to develop a language around their own emotional responses.
Is that one of your beliefs? Is that most people just don't even have a language when it comes to how they feel emotionally, so it's kind of up in the air with everything?
That's what the research tends to find, is that one of the things that's very interesting is that having a larger emotional vocabulary, even if you develop it in your adult life, tends to have health benefits as well. It has neurological benefits and it has cardiac benefits. And I think probably the neurological benefits are because now you know more. You are more aware of what's going on in your life. I think the cardiac benefits may be that instead of saying I'm stressed, which is just this umbrella term that could be anything, you can begin to identify, oh, I'm anxious and I'm anxious about that thing at work. And I'm angry because this person let me down. And I'm this because that, right? And instead of just having this sense of overwhelm and maybe it's a heart attack, I don't know what it is, right? Now you begin to be able to dial down into what's going on for you. So I think that might be what the protective cardiac mechanism is in having a larger emotional vocabulary.
So, is there a place where people can express their emotions without reacting? They get to this place of responding?
I think so. I teach sort of a third way between repression, which is to shut down an emotion, and expression, which is just to sort of blurt it out. I teach a third way, which is called channeling. And channeling, I mean, the not channeling a disembodied spirit, but the original meaning of channel, which is to move something along in the pathway that it needs to go. And so, for instance, with anger, which I said was about boundaries, you would look to what is the boundary challenge that has occurred and then address that, right? Instead of repressing it by pretending the boundary situation has not occurred or by expressing it violently, which that will set a boundary, right? If I tell you, screw you, back off, that will set a boundary, but you won't trust me. You won't, yeah, there'll be a boundary, but it'll be a harsh one. And I may injure that relationship. So if I know it's about boundaries and I know how to channel my anger, I may be able to say, instead of screw you, um, you had agreed to meet me here at 3 p.m. And I had cleared out my entire schedule for you to meet you here. And it's 4 and I haven't heard anything from you. What is going on? Are you okay? Right? I tell you what the boundary violation was and I keep our relationship going. I'm setting a boundary, right? But now it's in your court. And I'm not just cutting off the relationship, with a battle lance. I'm still setting a boundary, but I'm maintaining the relationship because that's one of my values. And anger is about what your values are.
And that also, would that also open like the doorway for active listening? Because we never know what's going on with the people around us. I know a lot of times we seem so intentional with our own hurts and feelings, like, oh, these people are doing this to me. A lot of times there are other things that are happening that have nothing to do with us.
Yeah, it's almost sort of, you almost always need to check in, right? And people tend to check in maybe 10% of the time. And they say, well, this is what you were doing. You're so, and notice when told the story about anger, I stayed with the facts, which is we agreed to 3. Now it's 4. What's happening? I didn't say, and you're so rude, and you don't care about me, and you don't respect my time. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not assuming. I'm waiting to hear from the person about what in the world has happened. Yeah. So being able to leave an opening for people to say what's going on with them is so important.
In your book, you share mindfulness exercises.
Mhm.
Why was that important?
I grew up in the yoga and meditation community, and I found, at least in that area where I was, that most of the meditation I learned was not welcoming of emotion. It was sort of you wanted to get into this emotionless state, which we know is not possible. but that was where they were going. And I was so filled with emotion that I felt very much like an outsider. And so what I did was I developed my own mindfulness skills, my own meditation skills that included emotion and actually relied on emotion so that I could continue in my work of befriending and understanding emotions. So I call them the empathic mindfulness practices because they show empathy toward me and toward emotions. And so you don't have to shut down emotion to do these practices. In fact, they rely on emotions.
Where do you think people get hung up as they start working with their emotions?
A lot of it is the messages that we have uploaded from parents and teachers and pretty much everywhere about positive and negative emotions. That's certainly one of them, about what it means to be emotional. There's a lot of messaging out there that wants to keep us away from our emotions. And so that, depending on how important that is to you, that can be a difficult stepping stone. You're like, I know what you said about anger, but I just don't know. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. So yeah, it can be hard to make that that step.
So, when we have multiple emotions, how do we identify those?
That is another function of vocabulary. When I was talking about when I'm stressed, and it turns out stress is usually anxiety and fear and anger and shame. And so you can sort of look around the vocabulary list and find out what emotions are you feeling. What I've noticed is that many people, they see that when there's trouble, there's a lot of emotions around. And where they've gone with that is that the emotions cause the trouble. What I've found is that the emotions come to help you deal with the trouble. So if there's a bunch of them there, then you have a bunch of friends who can help you, as long as you know what they are and you have befriended them and you do know how to work with them. You're going to be able to move through trouble lickety split, where I can move through stuff sometimes in an afternoon that might have taken me a year or two before I understood how emotions work and how they can help.
In your book, you talk about empathetic awareness. I'd love
Mhm.
for you to share that for our listeners.
Empathy is a very interesting skill. It is a human skill, certainly, but many animals have empathy. And empathy is our capacity to understand something deeply, both emotionally, socially, in terms of the social structure, to understand thoughts, perceptions, ideas. I once looked at empathy as something kind of that was separate from other forms of cognition. But what I'm looking at now is that empathy is sort of um, it is our capacity to engage with anything. So my capacity to engage with emotions, with music, with art, with drama, with plumbing. I have really good empathy with plumbing. I don't know why. With electrical work, with mathematics, with engineering, with just I'm seeing empathy now as my capacity to engage. And that really opens it up and sort of takes it out of um, the just the primarily emotional place. I mean, empathy is first and foremost an emotional skill, but if emotions are cognition, then empathy is our capacity to act on cognition. So it really is our capacity to engage with the world that we perceive.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Karla McLaren in regards to her new book, The Language of Emotions: What Your Feelings Are Trying to Tell You. We'll be right back after these messages.
Are you a coffee lover who wants to make a difference? Look no further than Fire Department Coffee, a veteran-owned business that gives back to support first responders in need. Each batch of coffee is freshly roasted right here in the USA by a dedicated team of first responders and coffee experts. So when you enjoy a cup of fire department coffee, you're not only drinking high-quality coffee, you're supporting members of your community. Start your day with a coffee that gives back. Visit firedepartmentcoffee.com. That's fire, D-E-P-T, coffee.com.
Are you looking to untangle life's riddles? Discover the profound teachings of Dr. Shai Tabali, renowned philosopher, best-selling author, and your guide to self-empowerment. With methods that harmonize psychological and spiritual principles, Dr. Tabali's wisdom offers a pathway to holistic transformation. Take that first step today and join thousands globally and embrace the journey to higher consciousness. Visit shaitabali.com, that's SHAITUBALI.com now.
Hello, Dr. Cutler here. Do you experience bloating, heartburn, food craving, bowel irregularity, food sensitivities, weight issues? If you do not digest your food, you may be deficient in macronutrients, which your body needs for optimal health. DrEllenCutler.com teaches that this is an enzyme deficiency. I believe the most important supplement is a full-spectrum digestive enzyme, Dr. Ellen's Way Digestive Enzymes. Hear more about it at DrEllenCutler.com.
Are you chasing profitability yet losing fulfillment? Let me introduce you to your solution, the Relaunch Company. I'm Hillary DeCesar, an entrepreneurial performance coach, fearless leader of the Relaunch Company, here to help put the pedal to the metal and relaunch your business your way. Visit www.therelaunch.com. Take the free quiz to learn 3 steps towards waving goodbye to burnout and hello to success.
The book Terminal Cancer is a Misdiagnosis, authored by Danny Carroll, is on sale at Amazon now. Licensed psychologist and psychotherapist Tessa Antia-John-Guerra commented, "This is one of the most empowering books on the topic of cancer you will ever read." Award-winning author T.L. Needham commented, "This recommended book can be understood by anyone seeking answers, hope, and alternatives to a terminal diagnosis. Buy it now on Amazon.com.
Are you feeling disconnected from your life and your body as a woman? Do you feel numb emotionally and/or sexually and just not sure how to feel really alive again, or maybe for the first time? Are you struggling with body and self-acceptance, especially during menopause? If you'd like to reclaim your feminine and learn more about women and gynecology and how it can help empower your life, contact Gina Cloud at www.ginacloud.com.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with our special guest, Karla McLaren, who's here to share with us her new book, The Language of Emotions: What Your Feelings Are Trying to Tell You. So, Karla, you have a quote in your book that has really stuck with me, and I'd love for you to share on this for our listeners. Emotions don't cause problems, they arise to help you deal with problems. So, what did you mean by that?
When I had said that people notice when there's trouble, there's emotions around. And what I finally realized is that emotions come forward with the precise amount of energy you need to deal with whatever you're dealing with. And the way that I found this was, as it is for many people who were abused in childhood, I grew up to have very intense emotions, especially depression. I think I had my first suicidal depression when I was 10. And so I kind of grew up with suicide and depression. I also had a lot of rage. And if we understand the purpose of anger is to set boundaries, that rage, which is intense anger, I was without boundaries. I was hyper empathic. I was hypersensitive. I kept myself open to everything around me so that I could be safe. But what that meant was that I didn't have any sense of protection. So that's where that rage was coming from. And going, working with emotions one by one, in my late teens, I finally realized, my life would be great except for this detestable, ridiculous depression. It's there's nothing good about it. And eventually, I turned toward the depression and said, "What do you want, pal? What do you want?" And I had braced myself for my depression to say, "You're worthless. You're hopeless. You should die. You're the thing that is the problem in the world." I had braced myself for that. And what I saw instead was a scene suddenly went black. And then I was in London, and I was um, parents putting children on trains to go to the country in World War II. And I was like, what? I don't even, what is that even? What is that? But I began to feel into it. I'm a writer, so of course I have a very vivid imagination. But what I understood depression to be was a protective mechanism that was removing parts of my energy and sending it to the country while I was in a state of war. And just that vision carried me for the next, 5 or 8 years of understanding what that meant. But what the war was me and my boundaryless state dragging, landmines behind me of all of the messaging that I picked up during the abuse that I experienced, right? And the way that I was living and the way that I was behaving in the world were based primarily on what I had learned as a very young child, being abused. And that was unlivable. It was dangerous. It was horrifying, the way I lived, the way that I believed things about the world. And these emotions were coming to help me. And that was amazing. Depression now is one of my best friends. Suicide and I hang out and laugh because I understand what they're for, understand how they work. And in the situation that I experienced in my life, which no one should ever experience, these emotions were the only things that could help me.
In your book, you talk about judgment. Is there ever a healthy use of judgment?
Yes. Judgment has become a synonym for just being a crappy person. But judgment in its real definition is a synonym for intelligence, and to have a critical faculty, right? To judge something is to make a decision about whether it works or not. And that is something that we should all be able to do. When people look down on judgment, they say, "Don't be so judgmental." I think they're saying, "Don't be critical for no reason." Because you can just be a cranky, critical so and so and just, be a black cloud in this world. But to be forbidden judgment, if people say that to me, I look around for the social control, because to be forbidden judgment is to be forbidden your own mind and your own emotions and your own understanding of the world. And so if people are, throwing around that no judgment rule, I perk up right away and I look around for what kind of shenanigans are going on here that they don't want me to judge it, because I'm going to judge it. You cannot control me, right? But yeah, I think it's so important to rescue the word judgment, because we know when someone says to you, "You don't have very good judgment," that's not that's not a good thing. That they're not thinking well of you. If you don't have good judgment, it means you can't think properly.
In doing this practice throughout your book and what you teach, is this really for us to create a new vision of ourselves?
I guess that's a good question. I guess yes. If I can look at myself, as a teenager dealing with the incredible pain I was in, the way that I looked at myself was never going to work. It was never going to be functional. And so moving into emotions, I was able to find a deeper and more enduring and more functional truth about myself. So yes, I think it can really help you see yourself in a new way.
Often you hear when people have really heavy trauma that they're dealing with, and this isn't always the case, but I've heard that this could be the case. They suffer from things like addiction and, things that cause them to avoid what's going on. How do they get to a place where they can really confront their feelings?
Learning the language of emotions is so important because they're all there for a reason and they all have a healing purpose. I think just learning that can help people understand specifically which emotions they're having difficulties with, and then specifically what that emotion does. For instance, shame. Most people have a great deal of trouble with shame, and a lot of that is because we learn about shame by being shamed, which is abusive. And so having shame used against us gives us kind of you know, a picture of shame as a problem. And when we feel our own shame, it can be overwhelming. But when we can understand shame as it's the emotion that holds our ethics and values, and it's our conscience. And so the work with shame is to make sure that our ethics and values are ones that we actually want. I think a lot of us go through this world being shamed into holding ethics or values that actually don't work for us at all. So we don't we sort of don't even have a choice point in our own lives. Understanding what shame does and how it works can help you sort of detoxify all of the messages that shame is responding to and find some better messages that you can live. For instance, I would like to floss. That can be one of my values. And every time I floss, I can be living up to my value, my ethics. But many people have, ethics and values such as no one will ever love you until you're perfect. And then some poor soul comes to love you, and your shame holding on to those nasty ethics and values would go on a bender. Not because shame is the problem, but because those messages and ethics and values are unlivable and inappropriate.
It seems that we are so distracted by social media and our society as a whole. How do we move slowly from that to a place where we can really be within our own, not really bubble, but within our own?
For me, I'm on social media because I am, because I'm an author. And for me, there's a way to maintain myself on social media, which is just to make sure I know how I'm feeling and what emotions people on social media are trying to evoke in me, because it's a very manipulative, it's a very manipulative place, as you know. It's always wanting your attention. It's like an adorable but annoying 3-year-old who's constantly dancing around and saying, "Look what I can do! Look what I can do!" um, so looking at social media with a critical eye, but also taking time off of social media. I think that's really important, to sit quietly and read so that you can get your own mind back, because there is a kind of a mind hijacking that happens where, you're just going to sit down and watch one thing and then it's 4 hours later. And what happened? What happened to you? And that's a part of the internet. It's a part of social media that they want to keep your eyes glued to it. So know that you're in a manipulative, unsafe environment where they don't mean you, they don't mean you well. They want to make money off of you, and to be more hip to it instead of being sort of an unaware consumer or an unaware consumed.
So, is there a role our trauma plays in all this?
Yes. I think many people in our modern society are dealing with a lot of traumatic situations. And though we have resilience is a very important concept. And some good research by George Bonanno shows that about 2/3 of people come through whatever trauma they're in, can be a big trauma or a little one. 2/3 of people come through and they regain their resilience. They're okay. We're a very resilient species. We wouldn't be alive as long as we had been, in this world with no hair and no claws and pretty pathetic teeth. We wouldn't have been able to survive as a species if we weren't resilient. But for the 1/3 of people who don't develop they don't, reclaim their resilience, then that can mean that they're kind of in a repeat pattern with the original traumatizing incident. And for many people, that can make them, I would say, want to avoid emotion, because emotions are the thing in us that is, very alive and very aware. And so maybe if I'm having a lot of difficulty with a trauma that I haven't, recovered from, then I might want to avoid emotions. And so I think a lot of people avoid emotions for that reason. And the sad thing is, it's the emotions that will heal you, specifically panic.
Oh boy, you touched a big one there, panic. How are some ways people can manage their panic?
In the new language of emotions, I've got actually a table on how to work with panic. I look at panic as two things, and this is a change that I made from the original version of the book to the new one, is I'm seeing panic in two ways. One is immediate panic, which is the fight, flee, freeze, flock to safety emotion, that a ball comes at you and boom, you're protecting yourself. The car swerves, boom, you're protecting yourself. It's a very, very fast, very brilliant emotion that will keep you alive. It's a life-saving emotion. And I also saw that there's another part of panic, which is what I call frozen panic, which is panic that is holding the memories and the situation in which you were overwhelmed and you haven't yet regained your resilience from. So that frozen panic would be what people call flashbacks or PTSD, although I don't use that term, post-traumatic stress disorder, because I don't think it's a disorder. I think it's a condition that that is necessary to remind you of the place where you lost your resilience. Because we are such survival-focused mammals, there's a part of us that needs to go back and get the information from that place where we were overwhelmed and we lost our resilience. And it's helpful to go through this with someone who understands what's happening. And there are some good people in the somatic psychology world, but there's also some trouble in that world. So I would say be careful with that. But it's really helpful to be with people who understand how panic works and why it would bring us back to a painful situation. It's so that we can gather survival information and move forward with more information.
If we've been doing the work on ourselves, but we get to a place where we have not really restored our boundaries, is it possible for us to get into a position of forgiveness?
I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people can forgive from a position of boundarylessness, but I think that's just a continuation of the problem. I think, a lot of people talk about anger and forgiveness being sort of enemies, but I find them to be really important allies, really important partners in the movement toward real forgiveness for real injuries. And it's so important to be able to identify the people in our lives who have hurt us and who are unsafe, because just as it is with panic trying to bring us back to a time when we were overwhelmed, where we need to get information about that situation, so if we ever see it again, we're going to have some skills. I think the same thing is if someone hurts you and the first thing you do is apologize, or apologize to them or forgive, then you're not going to be learning about people who are not safe, who don't value you, who are not trustworthy. it's really important to call out the not trustworthy people in your life and to make decisions about who you will and will not allow next to you. Yeah. I look at boundaries as not just like one thing, but I have a boundary very close to my heart where there's a very few people. I have a boundary that is a little further out, which is where friends and, other family are, and then a boundary that's further out, and then I have many, many, many boundaries now, which is great because when I was little, I had none. Now I have like a rainbow assortment of boundaries, and I make decisions about who gets to be where.
In your book, you talk about love not being emotion. Can you expand on that for our listeners?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. And what I realized is that it's normal for emotions to come and go, but it would be very unfortunate if love did that. It's normal for emotions to start out slow and then go high and then back off and move, and change and do all sorts of things. But that would not be healthy if love did it. I look at love as a deathless promise. It will last if I say I love you, it lasts forever. Nothing changes it, no matter what. And I might not want to live with you. I might not want you to have my credit card, but the love never wavers. And that's nothing like emotions. I notice emotions, they move, they pop, they join together, they go in and out. They're like otters. They're sort of everywhere. But love is a stable, it's like a rock. It's a certainty for me, whereas emotions are continually movable and mutable.
Do people tend to try to explore love as an emotion?
Yes. Yes. And I think it can look like an emotion if it's mostly that infatuation kind of love. I don't know if you remember the pain of teenage love, where you're in love and then you're out of love and then you're in love again. And then, it's very, very, very dramatic. But there's who was it who called it? Is it Robert Johnson? In the book We, he called it a stirring the oatmeal kind of love. And I read that when I was a teenager, and I went, yeah, that's what I want. A love that's about being in the house together and doing something like stirring the oatmeal, instead of a love that's about, jumping off of cliffs for each other. Yeah, for many people, love is an emotion. I don't want to say that. That's not nice to emotions. For many people, love is something that comes and goes. It is almost like a fashion. I love you. I don't love you. I love this person. I like you, but I don't love you. That sort of thing. That it's a game. And for me, that's not what love is.
Well, it's good to dive into that and see the different aspects of it, because I think a lot of times people get very confused when it comes to what it is they're feeling. And that's, of course, why The Language of Emotions is such a powerful book.
Thank you.
So you have so many mindfulness practices in your book. You talked about one was the 5 empathic mindfulness practice. Why did you develop that?
I developed those to help people, especially in our kind of emotionally repressive or strange modern culture, to help people find ways to work with emotions and work with their body and work with any kind of overwhelm that they might come to. So the 5 main mindfulness practices, and we've got more of them, are grounding so that you can feel stable in your body, focusing so you know where you are, setting your boundaries, which is a way to start working with anger and shame, burning contracts, which is another way to work with shame, which is a lot of the ways that we are in the world are actually something we learned from others or something we decided to do, but they're not actually authentic. And I developed a practice called burning contracts to help people kind of look at their behaviors as decisions rather than things that are written in stone, and to be able to make shifts in it. For instance, if one of my contracts is, I'm going to be perfect at all times when I play the oboe, and that's not possible, I need to rewrite that contract and say, I can make mistakes when I play the oboe. And that will help me learn how to do it in a more useful way, right? I need to make contracts that work for me. Another one is called conscious complaining. And that's one that I borrowed from Barbara Scher, who wrote a beautiful book called Wishcraft. And it's about the things you wish for and dream of are the things you actually need to do in your life. But to do that, to really do that, you're gonna be Sisyphus sometimes, pushing that rock up a hill, and it's always going to come back down on you. And if you don't know that, and if you don't have a practice for talking to yourself or others about just how hard it is, then you probably won't make it. You probably won't live your dream. So I read that book early on, and it was so helpful to me, and I kept that practice and turned it into conscious complaining. Because a lot of people don't want us to complain. But a lot of times what I find in complaining is that you're telling the truth about what's happening. And if you can get to it, it's wonderful. And then the fifth one is called rejuvenation, where you can refill yourself and refresh yourself with your emotions and get yourself back to a place of feeling really stable again.
In your book, you talk about getting grounded. Why is that important?
I think for a lot of people, especially when they feel activating emotions like anxiety or fear, there's a way that they sort of lift away from their experience. Like they get overwhelmed. And grounding is a way to sort of help your body feel safe, feel connected to the earth. Grounding is also a form of running chi energy downward. If you've ever been in martial arts training, before they let you jump and kick, they make sure that you have a connection to the earth, that you're grounded, that you're stable. And I find that it helps me to maintain my position in the world, to know where I am, in space, and to know that I am connected to the earth. It helps me know where my center of gravity is.
Well, Karla, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your book, The Language of Emotions?
They can come to my website, karlamclaren.com, where there's lots of free things, including a free emotional vocabulary list. It's now in 8 languages. It's very exciting. People just come to the site and say, can I put it in this language? And I'm like, yes. I also have an online learning site called empathyacademy.org. And we have courses and workshops there every month on one emotion, all emotions, empathy, just sort of lots and lots of ways to explore this work.
Well, Karla, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Karla. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Language of Emotions. The Language of Emotions is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. You can also order this book directly from the publisher, Sounds True, at soundstrue.com. Make sure to visit Karla's website at karlamclaren.com. That's KarlaMclaren.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.